You guys want to see a beast of a PC? Well, I'm excited to build this thing. We're going to go ahead and use an AMD Ryzen 5950X CPU, and then we're going to combine it with an Nvidia 3090 FE GPU. Talk about power. So in this video, we're going to do the complete build, and I'll show you all the components that I used, and then we're going to go ahead and install Windows, and then we're going to go ahead and do some benchmarks using these bad boys, because these two together, it's going to be some beast mode action going on. The motherboard we're going to use is the ASUS ROG Strix X570E Gaming. We dropped the motherboard right on top of the box right here. We're going to go ahead and install everything. We're going to install this beast of a CPU. It's Ryzen 9 5950X, like I said, 16 core, 32 processor, PCIe 4.0. It's runs base 3.4 gigahertz, 4.9 gigahertz max boost, max power. Let's go ahead and get that installed here. Go ahead and flip this up. And then we're going to go ahead and that corner, little arrow right here, and then we're going to go ahead and grab this where there is the little arrow on the side. I'm not touching the pins, touching the side of the CPU, and then you can see that there's a little arrow right on here. And then we're going to go ahead and line up the arrows and drop that in. It should not force it, just drops in real nice. Close that up, boom, CPU done. All right, next up, we're gonna go ahead and install our hard drive, which is the NVMe M.2. It's a Samsung 970 EVO in 500 gigs. So we're gonna go ahead and install that right underneath here. All right, let's go ahead and install our RAM, and we're going to be using G.Skill, which I love their RAM, good RAM, and it's the Trident Z RGB, and then it is 3600 megahertz, and then CL16, and we got 8 gigabytes per stick. We're going to be installing 4, so 32 gigs of RAM here. And then we'll go ahead and flip back these, and then typically there's only one way you can put the RAM. Don't force it in. One of these the slots here only go in, one is a little longer, so we're going to go ahead and install that. Make sure we're not forcing it, and pop that on down until you hear a click. So we're going to go ahead and click, click, click. RAM installed. Boom! So I was going to use this NZXT 360 rad. And what I like to do before I actually install it on the motherboard is I like to go ahead and bring the case up and see exactly what orientation or where I'm going to actually install this radiator before I actually mount it onto the CPU, because there's different ways. If I put it up top, if I put it on the side, do I mount it like here? Do I mount it right here? All right, so knowing that we're going to mount the radiator like this, the tubes on this side, we want the fans and the fan cables to be back here. So we're going to go ahead and install the fans with the cables pointing back. And since we're going to be building in the Antec DP502 FLUX case, we're going to go ahead and use the FLUX system, which basically has the fans, 3 fans on the front, and then we're going to have 3 fans on the top, and 1 on the back, and 1 mounted on the PSU shroud to pull in air from the back panel. And so we're going to go ahead and install these Antec Prizm 120 ARGB fans and on this radiator. So let's go ahead and do that now. And we want to make sure that these fans are going to be exhausting, so they're going to be set to right here. So meaning that these fan bars, basically the airflow moves from here to here. And so we want to be able to install it right here so that it sucks in air, pushes it out the top right here. So it'll be exhaust that way. Now we've got the fans installed, time to install the AIO, and make sure that your AIO, if it comes pre-applied with thermal paste, go ahead and obviously use that. I've used this AIO before, so the thermal paste is gone, so I'm going to apply thermal paste to the CPU. And we're going to go ahead and use a pretty popular one at Amazon. It's a pretty good one. It's Arctic MX4 thermal paste, and we're going to go ahead and just apply kind of like a grain of rice or like a pea size amount on the CPU here. and then go ahead and drop the AIO right on top. And then make sure we put the AIO, drop it down evenly, and screwing down the screws kind of like diagonal, and then kind of so it goes down even and doesn't smash or apply the thermal paste uneven, nice and smooth and even level over the top. Then the motherboard comes with some clips that you can use on some AIOs and some air coolers, but I had removed those. And so we're going to go ahead and use the NZXT system. So read your AIO manual because it could be different on how you actually mount it. So we're going to go ahead and just mount it to this bracket, keeping the existing bracket here. And read the AIO instructions. Go ahead and drop it down. Then on the AIO pump, you should have a 3-pin connector that you connect either to the CPU fan header or the AIO pump. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it into the AIO pump, just knowing that some of these motherboards, if you don't have anything plugged into the CPU fan, you might get an error, but you can go ahead and get into the BIOS after you boot everything up and go ahead and ignore that error. I'm going to go ahead and remove the non-RGB fan that was included with the case. Now that we've got that fan removed, we're going to go ahead and place the motherboard down. We got all the standoffs right here already pre-installed. So let's go ahead and get that dropped in here. All right, now time to install another Prizm fan in the back, remembering that we're going to go ahead and have the air flow this way and out the back with the fan bars. So air intake, flow here, cold air here, and exhausting out the top and the back. In Antec's FLUX system, we're going to go ahead and install one on the PSU shroud right here. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it's sucking air in, blowing out, so we want it to flow the fan bars on top because we want it to flow this way. There's also little arrows on here. For this build, we're going to go ahead and use a Seasonic 1000 watt PSU just because I have an Antec 700 watt, but the minimum requirements for a 3090, we also have a beefy CPU, the 5950X, so it's probably going to require a little bit more power. So instead of just the minimum 750, or can I use the Antec 700, I'm going to use the Seasonic 1000 watt. Should give us plenty of power for those two beefy components. And we're also going to use some Reaper cables, some PSU extension cables. These are going to go great, nice and gray. They're going to look real good. We got all the extensions installed, and make sure when you install the PSU that the fan is on the bottom if it has a vent here. So we're going to go ahead and install that here real quick. All right, let's go ahead and hook up all the cables. Sometimes that it's smart before you install some of this stuff is to plug in the CPU cables if you can't get to it. This one I can get to it, so I went ahead and installed it. Also, I installed this fan before I forgot last time. I have a hard time, some of these pins down here are hard to get to, but I think I might be able to get to it. So let's go and install the motherboard, the 24-pin, UPS, the CPU ones, and then all the ones for the front panel and USB 3 and all that stuff. Let's get that installed now. Plug it in the front panel, power switches and LED lights and stuff like that. Take a look at your motherboard and see exactly which ones are which, but they're nicely labeled with an HDD LED plus minus. power switch and the power LEDs and stuff like that. And there's usually a reset that kind of goes down in here. So take a look at your motherboard and plug them in accordingly. So now we're going to plug in the Prizm fans, the 5 fans that I use, the RGB fans, into this hub. It's got a 4-pin PWM fan speed connectors, along with the 3-pin 5-volt RGB connectors. We're going to go ahead and plug that in. And we're going to plug, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that way. So if there's any kind of effects, it'll kind of go in a nice smooth motion. All right, it's time to install the GPU, which is the Nvidia RTX 3090 FE Founders Edition. This thing is a chunky boy, it's big. So we're gonna go ahead and I believe this is a 3 expansion slot. We're gonna go ahead and remove those expansion slots, get this thing installed, and it's gonna look sick. Moment of truth. Hooray! Yes! We have power. So satisfying. Oh, nice. Now, since this is a complete build, I'm going to show you exactly what I encountered. Basically, if your computer, you hook it all up and it fails to post, which means that there's, information on the screen. You can see like the BIOS come up and stuff. Basically, it fails to do anything on a monitor that you plug in. Everything else turns on. That's good. There's a little error code on your motherboard sometimes, depending on the motherboard you have. Can kind of tell you exactly what the problem is. So I can already tell you this motherboard doesn't recognize this new 5th gen AMD Ryzen 5950X. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna have to flash this motherboard BIOS, get it up to date so it recognizes the CPU, and then it should be able to post. And I'll show you how to do it. Every motherboard is slightly different, but this one actually does have a little USB BIOS flashback that you can use. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna download the latest BIOS version for my motherboard that I have here, and then we're gonna go ahead and prepare it to be able to do a BIOS flashback on this motherboard, depending on what you have. If you don't have this capability on the motherboard where it has a little BIOS flashback button on the motherboard, then you might have to get an older CPU that this motherboard recognizes, get in there and update the BIOS, swap out the CPU to the latest 5th gen one or whatever you have, and then it should work. So let's do it. So grab your USB flash drive and plug it into a working computer with internet access. So basically you're gonna go to your motherboard's manufacturer website to download the latest BIOS utility. Follow the prompts or anything else that you need to do for your exact motherboard to do a BIOS flashback using this method. With the ASUS ROG Strix X570E gaming that I have, it basically downloads the file, and then I have to run a little renamer for it to recognize the correct file on my motherboard when doing a BIOS flashback. So after we got everything downloaded and following all the steps, got the correct BIOS on here, we're gonna plug it into the PC we just built, update the motherboard BIOS, and then so it recognizes the CPU that we just installed. Let's do this. All right, we turned the power off on the PC, but it's still plugged in. PSU is still plugged in and turned on, so the motherboard does have power. We're gonna go ahead and plug in our USB stick that has this file and plug it in right here, and then we're gonna go ahead and flash back. We're gonna hold this down until it starts blinking. You can see in here that there's a little light that is flashing. That means that is doing the flashback right now, and you saw the little light on the USB stick that I was actually reading. So it is working on updating the BIOS on the motherboard right now. All right, so you know it's done when the light goes off, and hopefully the motherboard's BIOS got all updated and recognizes our new 5th gen CPU, and we get a post. We can actually get into BIOS. So let's turn it back on. Let's see what we get. So we successfully updated the BIOS. As you can see, it's 3604 there. And what I also found out too is it didn't post because the NZXT pump, those tubes were pushing on a stick of RAM, causing it to not post. So that was the first time experiencing that. So what I did is I just rotated the pump and the tubes. The tube will be on the bottom. so allowed to still rock 4 sticks of RAM. So let's go ahead and hit F1 to run through the setup here, and then we'll get everything all installed here in the BIOS. So first thing, let's go ahead and increase the memory. Our RAM sticks need to be basically overclocked, because by default you can see that it says 2133, 2133 megahertz, and obviously that is not correct. We got 3600s. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go over to AI Tweaker and then AI Overclock Tuner. We're gonna go ahead and select DOCP, and then that should automatically recognize the type of RAM that we have. And you can see the memory frequency right here is the auto detect, the 3600 megahertz. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. We're gonna leave everything else stock while we test, because some people are not comfortable maybe with overclocking and stuff like that with CPU and GPU, RAM, anything like that. So we're gonna go ahead and leave everything stock. We're gonna go ahead and test on that. So we're just gonna go ahead and increase the memory here, and then we're gonna go ahead and hit exit, save changes, and reset. Okay. All right, now that I upgraded the BIOS on the motherboard, it's time to get Windows installed. If you don't know how to do that, follow this tutorial up here, and that will be everything you need to know. All right, now that I've got Windows installed, the first thing I do is check for updates and let it install all kinds of other updates that it has. And then it will download everything that you need, get it all up to date, install, download, reboot a couple times, check so it makes sure it's all up to date, and we can move on and install some other software. All right, the next thing I do is install software for the motherboard, to get all that stuff updated, like, latest drivers for like Ethernet and all that stuff. So let's go ahead, open up a browser and go ahead and search for your motherboard software. Support, driver and tools, choose your OS. Go ahead and download LAN, download wireless, audio, Bluetooth. Then under utilities, if you see all downloads, I download the ASUS AI Suite 3, software that basically kind of shows your fan configuration and allows you to do some other things with system information. So I'm gonna go ahead and download that too. And then also Utilities Armory Crate. I believe that this supports the LED lighting, so I'm gonna go ahead and download that. All right, let's go ahead and extract all of these, and we'll go ahead and install everything here. Ran out of my drink. Use a file V9088V4. I'm gonna go ahead and install the Nvidia drivers now and make sure our graphics card is all up to date. All right, let's launch that. All right, go to drivers, and let's make sure we download the latest driver here. Let's do Express. Boom, complete. Bam. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Get the NZXT cam software installed. This will allow you to, change fan speeds, lighting, all kinds of other specs. And then this should be pretty much it for the software. You can also, if you install like Thermaltake ring quads or Corsair, you can download some of that software. But since we're gonna have our fans connected to the motherboard and have the motherboard run the lighting and all that stuff, I believe that is everything. Go ahead and do a reboot, and then we'll get in some games and we'll see how this bad boy performs. All right, guys. Move, get out of the way. Get out of the way. All right. All right. That was close. Thought he was gonna get me. There we go. Come on. All right. There we go. There we go. Let's open a new shot. Oh, boom. Bye bye.
Like we do it.
Come on over here. Come on, boy. Come on, boy. Oh, someone's shooting at me. Not today, son. Not today. Scan the perimeter. Not today, boys. Not today. Oh, we got boys coming. Yeah, see ya. Bye. No, no. All right, we're gonna play Cyberpunk now, and we're gonna take a look at the settings we have. Here's the graphics. I'm gonna keep it the same, kind of like what I do with 2070 Super. I'm gonna keep the contact shadows off, and then we're going to have everything high, ultra, and then ray tracing will turn off. And then we're at 1440p and maximum value for the maximum frames per second. Bump it all the way to 240. Even though it's 140 per hertz monitor, we're just gonna bump it up and see what it can do. Let's go ahead and get in and play this game once. See if I remember the controls. I have not played this very well. I haven't played it very much. So, out of bullets. Fire, 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 fire. I need to get back in and play this game a little bit more. See if we can get past this. Like that. Let's do one more. Boom, boom, boom. Come out. Come out. Come out wherever you are. Come out. Come on. Wow. That's it. Done. Now.